History often paints the Holocaust through the lens of male power, yet the machinery of the Third Reich relied heavily on thousands of women who were anything but passive bystanders. These were the SS-Aufseherinnen, guards who wielded authority with a level of cruelty that frequently eclipsed their male counterparts. While Nazi ideology publicly demanded domesticity, these women bypassed that ideal to embrace a life of industrial-scale violence. We are looking at individuals who turned concentration camps into personal theaters of agony. How did these young women, often born into ordinary lives, become the architects of such profound and clinical human suffering? The controversial Irma Grace of Belsen. To look at photographs of Irma Grace is to be confronted with a deeply unsettling dissonance. She possessed the face of a stereotypical German maiden, blonde hair, bright eyes, and a youthful glow that suggested anything but the architecture of hell. Yet, beneath this veneer lived one of the most prolific and sadistic killers of the 20th century. She was not a product of long-standing systemic indoctrination. She was an 18-year-old girl who, in a matter of months, transformed from a bullied apprentice nurse in Ration into an architect of industrialized suffering. When she bypassed her family's objections to volunteer at Ravensbrück in 1942, she stepped away from humanity and into a void where power, once tasted, demanded ever-increasing acts of cruelty. Her ascent was as rapid as it was terrifying. By March 1943, she arrived at Auschwitz II Birkenau. She did not linger in the lower ranks. Through sheer administrative ruthlessness, she earned a promotion to Oberaufseherin by December of that same year. By the time she turned 20, she held command over Camp C, a sprawling, misery-soaked complex of 31 barracks containing 30,000 Jewish women from across Europe. She was a god in this microcosm of death, holding the power of life and sudden agonizing expiration in her hands. Greece did not merely oversee the misery, she curated it. She was rarely seen without her signature accessory, a custom-made whip plaited from cellophane, which she wielded with expert, sickening precision. She patrolled the camp in heavy leather boots, the sound of which signaled immediate terror for the women forced to endure her presence. One of her preferred methods of control was what she called make sport. Under the guise of discipline, she forced emaciated, starving prisoners to perform deep knee bends, running and crawling for hours under the harsh sun. This was not about fitness. It was a calculated death sentence. She watched with cold detachment as women collapsed from physical failure, using these moments of exhaustion to flag those she deemed no longer fit for labor, sending them directly to the gas chambers. The depth of her pathology, however, reached its darkest point in the medical barracks. Dr. Gisela Perl, a Hungarian Jewish gynecologist who was coerced into working for the SS, provided a testimony that remains one of the most chilling accounts of the Holocaust. She described how Greasy would use her whip to slice open the breasts of young female inmates, deliberately inducing painful, festering infections. When Pearl was ordered to perform surgical drainages on these victims, she had to do so without anesthesia. Grease would stand over the table, watching the procedure with what could only be described as physiological arousal. She derived a twisted, orgasmic pleasure from the screams of the dying, and if a patient's cries faded too quickly, Grease would kick them to reignite the agony, ensuring her perverse theater continued until the very end. When the war finally broke at the gates of Bergen-Belsen in 1945, the British forces did not find a cowering figure. They found Irma Grace, who, upon being brought to trial in Lüneburg, maintained an air of chilling, impenetrable arrogance. She showed no remorse for the 500,000 deaths facilitated by her administration. She attempted to deflect all responsibility onto the higher echelons of the Nazi regime, specifically Heinrich Himmler, while casually admitting to the physical beatings she had personally administered as if they were mundane professional duties. Her facade never cracked. Not for the survivors, not for the judges, and not for the weight of the evidence presented against her. The only moment she displayed any semblance of human vulnerability occurred when her sister took the stand to testify about their father's past physical abuse. It was a brief, singular flicker of history before she retreated back into her cold, unrepentant shell. The court found her guilty of war crimes at both Auschwitz and Bergen-Belsen, sentencing her to the only penalty the law allowed for such depth of malice. On December 13, 1945, at Hamelin Prison, she walked toward the gallows with the same haughty confidence she had shown on the ramp at Birkenau. At 22 years old, she became the youngest woman ever executed under British law in the 20th century. Her final act was a scream of defiance, a sharp, guttural shout of "Schnell, hurry!" directed at her executioners as the trapdoor fell. She died as she had lived, demanding that the machinery of death move faster, never once acknowledging the magnitude of the lives she had extinguished. Buchenwald's Ilse Koch issues and controversies. The concentration camp system was a hierarchy of terror, but some figures within that machine operated entirely outside the conventional chain of command. Ilse Koch, the wife of Buchenwald Commandant Karl Otto Koch, provides the most disturbing example of how domestic entitlement fueled industrial-scale sadism. When she moved to Buchenwald in 1937, she brought with her an unchecked ego that turned the campgrounds into her personal fiefdom. Without an official state commission, she became a figure of absolute arbitrary power, patrolling the perimeter on horseback with a heavy leather riding crop. To her, the prisoners were not human beings, but scenery for her own vanity. Anyone who failed to look away or offer a subservient salute was instantly targeted for a savage, public flogging. She was the queen of a domain defined by death, and her cruelty was a matter of daily routine. The legacy of Ilse Koch is forever stained by the most grotesque accusation in the history of the Holocaust: the crafting of domestic artifacts from human remains. For decades, the narrative surrounding the Buchenwald lampshades was mired in skepticism. In the 1990s, when scientific scrutiny first turned toward these artifacts, high-profile DNA testing on some specimens yielded results pointing to cowhide, leading many to dismiss the accounts of survivors as exaggeration or propaganda. However, this early, flawed skepticism has been dismantled by modern forensic science. In 2023, a rigorous study led by criminal biologist Mark Benek analyzed the original lampshade taken from Karl Otto Koch's desk. The result was absolute. The material was confirmed to be human skin. This was not a singular anomaly. In 2025, a matching fragment of that same lampshade, which had been held by a British observer named Ness Edwards for 80 years, was returned to the Buchenwald Museum. Pathological testing on this fragment revealed the specific physiological distribution of pores and the distinct structural grain unique to human dermal tissue. These findings provide definitive material proof that the horrific testimonies of survivors like Dr. Gustav Wegerer and Josef Ackermann were rooted in reality. Ackermann's testimony, in particular, describing a lamp base fashioned from a human foot and shin bone delivered to the Koch villa in 1941, stands as a testament to the pathological nature of the Koch's domestic life. While the Nazi state did not mass-produce such items, the Buchenwald infirmary staff operated under a perverse mandate to satisfy the sadistic whims of the commandant and his wife. The legal handling of Ilse Koch's crimes remains a stain on the record of post-war justice. After the war, she was convicted by a military tribunal at Dachau and sentenced to life imprisonment. Yet, in a move that shocked the world, General Lucius D. Clay, the American military governor, commuted her sentence to time served in 1948. Clay dismissed the evidence of the skin artifacts as mere folklore, famously, and incorrectly, asserting that the lampshades were goat skin. This decision triggered a firestorm of outrage in the United States, prompting a Senate investigation that ultimately exposed how deeply the occupation authorities had failed in their duty to review the trial evidence. The political fallout was so severe that the Americans effectively washed their hands of her. On the very day she was released from American custody in 1949, she was rearrested by West German authorities. This second trial, conducted at Karlsruhe, focused on the murders of German and Austrian citizens, crimes that had been outside the reach of the initial Allied court. The evidence was overwhelming, and she was again sentenced to life with hard labor. The final chapter of Ilse Koch's life took place behind the walls of the Aichach Women's Correctional Facility. The woman who had once wielded a riding crop over thousands of broken lives withered away into a state of total, agonizing paranoia. In her confinement, she was consumed by the conviction that the ghosts of Buchenwald were coming for her, certain that survivors were waiting to infiltrate her cell and deliver the justice she had avoided for so long. She lived the rest of her life in the grip of these delusions, a prisoner of her own fractured mind. On September 2, 1967, at the age of 60, she ended her own life by hanging herself from the bars of her cell. Her death brought a cold, final conclusion to one of the most scrutinized and horrifying biographies of the entire era, the famous Maria Mandel of Auschwitz. Within the suffocating bureaucracy of the Third Reich, Maria Mandel occupied a position of near total control that few women ever achieved. As the Schutzhaftlagerführerin, or female camp leader, at Auschwitz II Birkenau, she was not a mere foot soldier of the regime. She was the architect of its most lethal administrative functions. While others operated in the shadows or the fields, Mandel signed the weekly death lists that sealed the fate of thousands. During her 2-year tenure, she was directly complicit in the murder of 500,000 human beings, a staggering figure that highlights her role as one of the most efficient killers in the history of the concentration camp system. She was the personification of the cold, calculating administrator, someone who viewed the systematic extermination of human life as nothing more than a logistical task to be managed with clinical precision. Mandel turned the camp into a theater of arbitrary, performative cruelty. She devised sadistic physical filters to decide who would live for another day of labor and who would immediately be sent to the gas chambers. Survivors remembered her standing at the camp gate as work details returned from the fields, holding a wooden cane exactly 50 centimeters above the ground. She forced the exhausted, starving women to jump over it. If a woman failed to clear the obstacle, or if she made the fatal error of meeting Mandel's gaze during the inspection, she was dragged from the line and sent to her death. Mandel's obsession with control extended even to the most personal violations. She would use her cane to probe women for jewelry and valuables they had hidden in their bodies, keeping the stolen items in a drawer at her home in Münzkirchen, a domestic souvenir of her reign of terror. The most disturbing facet of Mandel's character was her ability to compartmentalize her depravity through a facade of cultural refinement. In April 1943, she founded the Women's Orchestra of Auschwitz. She scoured incoming transports for talented musicians, eventually assembling a group of 42 women under the direction of the renowned Austrian violinist Alma Rosé. To the outside observer, this might have looked like a moment of humanity. The orchestra members were given clean uniforms, better rations, and were exempted from the grueling physical labor that killed so many others. But this was merely another layer of her psychological manipulation. Mandel forced these women to stand at the gates of Birkenau for hours, playing upbeat classical marches as the living were driven toward forced labor and the doomed were led toward the gas chambers. Witnesses frequently observed Mandel sitting in the front row of the orchestra's Sunday concerts, her face transfixed by the music. As the strings swelled, she would weep openly, seemingly moved by the beauty and depth of the compositions. Then, the concert would end, and Mandel would stand up, wipe the tears from her eyes, and walk directly from the hall to the crematorium to personally oversee the industrial mass murders she had orchestrated. This oscillation between soulful emotional response and calculated genocide defies easy explanation. It shows a psychological dissociation that allowed her to find beauty in art, while simultaneously engineering the total destruction of those who created it. Her capacity for cognitive cruelty was equally evident in her treatment of children. When new transports arrived from the Soviet Union, she would often select young children who had been torn from their parents. She would play the role of a doting mother, carrying them through the camp, feeding them stolen chocolate, and keeping them in her office like living dolls. She lavished them with warmth and affection for a few days, creating a terrifying illusion of safety. Once her interest waned, or the administrative schedule demanded it, she would simply stop the performance and escort the same children to the gas chambers. She treated the lives of children as disposable playthings, discarding them with the same lack of remorse she showed when signing a death warrant for thousands. When the Soviet forces drew near in 1944, Mandel attempted to vanish into the anonymity of her former life in Austria. Her own father refused to harbor her, and she was eventually apprehended by the U.S. Army in 1945. Because of her extreme brutality against Polish nationals, she was extradited to Poland for trial. During the Krakow-Auschwitz trial in 1947, she did not mount a frantic defense. She pleaded guilty to the charges of signing the death lists. Yet, in her final days, a strange transformation occurred in her cell at Montelupik prison. She shared a room with Stanisława Rashwałowa, a Polish resistance fighter whom Mandel had once personally terrorized at Auschwitz. Mandel spent her remaining hours begging this woman for forgiveness, a desperate plea from a woman who had spent years acting as an arbiter of life and death. On January 24, 1948, at the age of 36, she was executed. Her final words, shouted in Polish as the trapdoor opened, were a declaration that Poland lives. It was the end of a life defined by the utter erosion of human empathy. The known mayor of Majdanek. Imagine living in a quiet, unassuming neighborhood in Maspeth, Queens. You see your neighbor every morning. She is meticulous about her garden, keeps her home spotless, and strikes everyone as a perfectly ordinary, friendly housewife. Now, imagine finding out that the person who brings in her mail and smiles at the local grocer is the same woman who, only decades earlier, earned the terrifying moniker of the mayor of Majdanek. This was the reality for the residents of 72nd Street in the 1960s. Hermine Braunsteiner, an American citizen with a suburban life, had managed to bury her past deep beneath the surface of post-war American normalcy. She was the ultimate hidden monster, a woman whose hands were stained with the blood of hundreds, yet who successfully blended into the middle-class fabric of New York. Her comfortable existence collapsed by pure chance in 1964. The legendary Nazi hunter Simon Wiesenthal was dining in a Tel Aviv restaurant when he was approached by survivors of the Majdanek concentration camp. They spoke of a female guard who had haunted their nightmares, a woman who terrorized inmates with such viciousness that they dubbed her the Mare. Wiesenthal tracked her path from Vienna through Halifax and finally to that house in Queens. When reporter Joseph Lelyveld confronted her at her doorstep, she did not deny it. She greeted him with the eerie resignation of someone who had spent 20 years waiting for the knock. She admitted, "My God, I knew this would happen. You have come." The discrepancy between the housewife in Queens and the guard at Majdanek is difficult to reconcile. At the camp, she was the vice commandant of the female compound, and she commanded through absolute physical terror. She earned her nickname because of her weapon of choice: heavy, steel-studded leather jackboots. Survivors testified to the sheer brutality she unleashed during roll calls. She would fly into rages, kicking and stomping women until they were unconscious, often crushing the chests and throats of those who fell out of line. She treated human lives with a sociopathic indifference, particularly when it came to children. She would grab small children by their hair and throw them onto trucks bound for the gas chambers, dismissively referring to them as useless eaters. On one occasion, she found a young girl hidden in a backpack by her mother. She whipped the child for several minutes before personally dragging her to the crematoria. The exposure of Braunsteiner triggered a legal earthquake that reshaped how the United States dealt with war criminals. For years, the government had been largely indifferent, but her case changed everything. In 1971, her American citizenship was revoked because she had lied about her Nazi past during her naturalization process. The subsequent extradition proceedings were a masterclass in legal endurance. In 1973, after a federal judge heard harrowing testimony from survivors in a Queens courtroom, she became the first Nazi war criminal to be extradited from the United States to West Germany. This landmark event exposed massive systemic failures in American immigration enforcement and became the direct catalyst for the creation of the Office of Special Investigations, the DOJ unit specifically tasked with hunting down these hidden perpetrators. The third Majdanek trial, held in Dusseldorf, became the longest and most expensive trial in West German history. It spanned over 470 sessions, a marathon of testimony where survivors finally had their day in court. Throughout the proceedings, Braunsteiner remained unrepentant and combative, frequently succumbing to screaming fits and accusing the victims of lying. Her denial was absolute, even in the face of mountainous evidence. In 1981, she was finally convicted on 3 counts: the direct murder of 80 people, complicity in the murder of 102 children, and collaboration in the mass murder of 1,000 others. She was sentenced to life imprisonment. She remained incarcerated until 1996, when severe complications from diabetes led to the amputation of her leg and a compassionate medical release. She died 3 years later in 1999, at the age of 79. Her life stands as a chilling reminder of the proximity of evil. She was not a monster from a distant, inaccessible past. She was a neighbor, a citizen, and a housewife who carried the memory of her atrocities into the heart of a free society. Her death closed a long, difficult chapter of justice, but the case of Hermine Braunsteiner remains a permanent warning about how easily the most violent actors can hide in plain sight if the world decides to look away. Herta Bothe, the sadist of Stutthof. If you want to understand how the machinery of the Third Reich descended into pure, chaotic slaughter during its final months, look no further than Herta Bothe. Standing 6 feet 3 inches tall, she was a physically imposing figure who used her stature as a weapon, earning the moniker Sadist of Stutthof. She began as a nurse in 1942, but she quickly traded her clinical duties for the brutal discipline of the SS Auxiliary. By January 1945, as the Red Army closed in on the Stutthof concentration camp, Bothe was placed in command of the death marches. This was the final desperate act of a dying regime, a forced evacuation of hundreds of female prisoners across the freezing Polish landscape. Bothe did not just watch over these columns, she enforced the pace with lethal intent, executing any woman who collapsed from exhaustion or malnutrition to keep the march moving. When she arrived at Bergen-Belsen in February 1945, she took charge of a wood-cutting brigade, but the camp was already a graveyard. When British forces liberated Belsen on April 15th, they found a hellscape that defied description. 60,000 starving, disease-ridden survivors and over 13,000 unburied, decomposing corpses littering the earth. The British soldiers, moved to profound anger by the carnage, forced the captured SS guards, including Botha, to clear the camp. The irony was suffocating. Botha, who had spent years inflicting violence, was now forced by the victors to pick up the rotting, maggot-ridden limbs of the people she had helped starve and execute. She later recalled the sheer physical agony and the terror of contracting typhus as the bodies fell apart in her hands. She stood out in the line of guards not because of a uniform, but because of her height and her choice of civilian shoes, a small mundane detail against the backdrop of total human collapse. Her legal fate serves as a stark indictment of the shifting political priorities of the post-war era. During the Belsen trial at Lüneburg, the evidence of her brutality was clear. Survivors like Wilhelm Grunwald testified that they saw her shoot 2 women in cold blood after they fell while carrying heavy kitchen supplies. Yet, despite being identified as a ruthless overseer, she received a sentence of only 10 years. This leniency was not an accident of the courtroom, it was a symptom of the early Cold War. As the Western Allies shifted their focus toward the new threat of the Soviet Union, the political appetite for deep, exhaustive prosecution of war criminals evaporated. Botha served a mere 6 years, walking free on December 22, 1951, under a general amnesty. She vanished into the German countryside, living for decades under the name Hertha Lang. She was the face of the thousands of perpetrators who simply returned to civilian life as if the Holocaust were a job that had ended, not a crime against humanity that had occurred. It was not until 1999, mere months before her death, that she finally broke her silence in a broadcast interview. The interviewer asked if she had made a mistake in choosing to join the camp system. Her response was a masterpiece of cold, self-serving denial. She insisted that she had made no mistake. She argued that the mistake was merely the nature of the camp itself, and that she had been forced to go there, implying that she would have been a prisoner herself had she refused. This assertion is the ultimate act of psychological evasion. It is a calculated attempt to reframe an active, willing participant in industrialized mass murder as a victim of circumstance. Botha's defiance reminds us that the perpetrators of the Holocaust did not always view themselves as villains. They saw themselves as cogs, as people simply following the path of least resistance. Her unrepentant stance serves as a chilling, final warning. The capacity for evil does not always end with an explosion of rage. Often, it ends with a quiet, comfortable life and a refusal to acknowledge the magnitude of the blood on one's hands. Hertha Both died in 2000, free, unpunished, and completely convinced of her own innocence, leaving behind a legacy that mocks the very idea of justice.